Hi, sorry about that. We had some technical challenges. Happy New Year, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew, and I'm the Outreach and American Spaces Coordinator for the U.S. Embassy, Ghana. During the session, kindly put all comments or questions in the chat box. Today's event is in commemoration of Martin Luther King Day, which is observed on the third Monday of January. This year's celebration will be on Monday, January 17th, to honor the life and legacy of Dr. King and to encourage all Americans and people around the world to volunteer to improve their communities. With us today is Dr. Candace Moore, a Fulbright Fellow at the University of Cape Coast, to explore encouraging innovation and exploring restorative opportunities between the United States and Ghana through sustainable educational collaboration. Dr. Moore is an associate clinical professor in the Higher Education, Student Affairs, International Education Policy Program with the Department of Counseling, Higher Education and Special Education at the University of Maryland. She received a prestigious Fulbright Scholar Program Award from the U.S. Department of State to study in Ghana for the 2021 academic year. She earned her PhD in Counseling and Student Personal Services from the University of Georgia, Athens. She also served as a Student Affairs Administrator at various universities in functional areas such as residence life, campus life, student conduct, and adult education before joining the faculty at the University of Georgia as an inaugural program coordinator and co-developer of the Student Affairs Leadership ED program. Dr. Moore is affiliated with the University of Maryland College of Education's Center for Diversity and Inclusion in Higher Education, where she served as an inaugural director from 2017 to 2021. Professor Moore has presented and published her research on the local, state, regional, national, and international levels. Please join me in welcoming Professor Candace Moore. Prof, over to you.
Good afternoon. It is such a pleasure to be here with you today. And of course, to those that are joining us from GMT, good afternoon, but greetings to others who are joining us from around the world. I'd first like to extend my sincere appreciation to the U.S. Embassy in Ghana's Public Affairs Sector and Cultural Affairs Unit, and of course, the Information Research Center and American Spaces, led by Ms. Rita Eku, for this wonderful invitation to address the American Spaces youth audience. I've been so blessed to connect with such wonderful people, like our colleague Andrew, who just introduced me, and others at the embassy. I'm thankful for their work and dedication to the advancement of education throughout the country of Ghana. During this time of year, we get to focus on our remembrance and celebration of the life lived by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was an exceptional person, and his purpose-driven life led to life-changing policies, laws, and a more equitably just way of living, particularly for Black people in the United States, and ultimately influencing other communities around the world. I am forever grateful for his life and his calling and his sacrifice. It is also during this time of year that we acknowledge and give a great deal of respect to the legacy of Mrs. Coretta Scott King, his dutiful and courageous wife. For it's only due to her diligence and commitment to commemorating Dr. King's legacy during his birth month of January that we are able to have this shared experience of celebrating MLK Day. To Mrs. Coretta Scott King, I offer my respect and adoration for her life, her calling, and her sacrifice. As a native of Atlanta, Georgia, USA, who identifies as a Black woman raised by parents who lived during the Jim Crow era of segregation in Georgia of the US and fought for civil rights of Black people, my youngest memory of the movement and the life of Dr. King are indelibly etched into my remembrances. Most particularly, I recall the times when my family, who would gather around the television after participating in a full day of commemorative services, activities, and parades honoring Dr. King, sat down to watch the locally aired TV program titled The Boy King. The television show debuted in 1986 and featured Dr. King chronicling his life and childhood and noting how the significance of his parents' life lessons, experiences with his siblings, and the harsh realities of growing up in the South of the United States during the Jim Crow era had a profound influence on his trajectory into his role as a civil rights leader. Please indulge me for a moment as I share an excerpt from the film. In the clip from the film, you'll see the father of MLK Jr. organizing and mobilizing Black men in his Atlanta, Georgia community to get involved in the early days of the civil rights movement and change the status quo of the Jim Crow era in the South, which focused on keeping the Black community separate from the white community. The clip also highlights a young MLK Jr. and his dad, the Reverend MLK Sr., at a shoe store in Atlanta, and notes their experiences living in the South during that time.
When you send your children to the new high school.
Oh, yeah. Let's be honest, Martin. We got it made here on Sweet Auburn. Right. We don't bother the white folks, and they don't mess with us. Right. Now, why you want to go and rock the boat? Right. Your talk is dangerous, Martin.
Not if we believe that we can make a difference. Not if we keep faith in God and his covenant with us all. Amen. Amen. Not if we believe that reason and righteousness can shield us from all danger and lift us up to a higher place. Not if we believe that the pull of freedom is greater than the manacle of fear. I want you gentlemen to think about what I've said, please. And I want to thank you all for coming. And to have some literature. Thank you, brother, that you can take on your way out.
All right. Thank you, Mom.
Yeah, thank you, brother.
He has it for you. Thank you, brother. Thank you. Thank you, Cecil. Thank you, brother. He has it for you. Thank you, brother. Thanks for coming by.
Now, what's this here roadblock set up in front of me?
It's me.
And since when did you start reading the Constitution?
Since I found these shoes in this ad. with my name on them.
Looks like Edward's name to me. But son, you know, I don't like to go downtown to shop.
But these shoes and my feet were made for each other. They go great with my new tweed suit. And the ad says they'll last a long, long time. And the price isn't that high. Besides, even Christine can outrun me in these old things.
You win. After you, sir.
There they are.
Mm-hmm.
They're not too much, are they?
No, they're not too much.
Then what are we waiting for? There they are. Nice, aren't they?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I really must admit they are quite nice.
They look a lot nicer on my feet.
Take your hat off, son. Come on, now, let's sit down.
Aren't you going to do something about this?
The notion of that nigger sitting there makes my blood boil.
Well,
You're in the wrong place. Look, I'd be glad to serve you if you just sit in those seats.
Oh, there's nothing wrong with these seats. We're really quite comfortable where we are. Thank you.
We don't serve colored in the front of the store. Now, you can go all the way back there just like all the niggers do who come here are happy to do. And no exceptions. Look, you take it like everybody else and stop being so high and mighty.
You either serve us here, right here, or you don't serve us at all. Come on, son. We're leaving this place. We're going home.
Why do they make you so angry?
Because they try to make us feel that their cruelty and stupidity is our fault.
White people?
Segregationists,
Segregationists? Who are they?
a bunch of ignorant fools who can never learn to stop hurting people.
So what can we do?
First, we can get you those new shoes. Foot march this weekend.
Now?
Now!
Thank you for allowing me to share that clip with you. Now, as a child watching this film, I was overwhelmed with feelings of sadness, anger, frustration, while also experiencing feelings of hope and determination and an idea of overcoming injustice. For this illustration of his life story presents the good, the bad, and the ugly of the circumstances of the time period. I apologize for those who may have been offended by the slur that was used, but it is also a representation of the very challenging experiences that people had, not only during those days, but unfortunately continue until today. And remind me of the resilience from the people of the movement as they fought for liberation from oppression in the USA. Thank you for your patience. It is not lost on me that today, as we commemorate the season of Dr. King's life, I actually am physically located in the magnificent country of Ghana. And as we all know, there are many social historical connections between the US and Ghana. For the purpose of this session, I will focus on the connections between Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and their collective call to action for liberation from oppression in the US, Ghana, and across the continent of Africa. They completely understood our interconnectedness as a people and the implications of those connections have on our collective liberation from colonial oppression in both America and Ghanaian societies. For the purpose of this session, I will focus on the connections between Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Dr. Kwame Nkrumah with regard to education as a pathway to liberation. And truly note how those shared connections guide our discussions on the title talk that I'm sharing with you today. And that title is Encouraging Innovations and Exploring Restorative Opportunities between the US and Ghana through Sustainable Educational Collaborations. As a representation of my cultural consciousness, to focus on the context for which I'm most familiar, I'll specifically focus on the US context of higher education for this presentation. And recognizing the immeasurable impact of COVID-19 on our communities and our lives, I'll situate my comments in our collective context of experiencing COVID-19. We'll have an opportunity to learn so many lessons from the pandemic, but one of which is the opportunity for restoration through the realization of liberation in higher education. As outlined for my discussion, I'll focus on three central areas. First, viewing education as a liberatory practice and experience for the US and Ghana. Second, exploring the inequality in US higher education, particularly the impacts of COVID-19 on the lives of students. And third, reclaiming restorative opportunities to realize liberation through education for the US and Ghana, where I will also cover a global higher education transformative response model to the COVID-19 pandemic. First, viewing education as a liberatory practice and experience. From the encyclopedia collection of Dr. King's important papers held by Stanford University in the US at the Martin Luther King Jr. Research and Education Institute, the authors from the King Encyclopedia denote the connections between the King family and Dr. Nkrumah. And I quote, Martin and Coretta King attended Ghana's independence ceremony on the 6th of March, 1957, at the invitation of Nkrumah. King was impressed by Nkrumah's leadership and keenly aware of the parallels between Ghanaian independence and the American Civil Rights Movement. While in Ghana, the Kings shared a private meal with Nkrumah, discussing nonviolence and Nkrumah's impressions of the United States. After returning to the United States, King explained the lessons of Nkrumah and the Ghanaian struggle in a series of speeches and sermons. On April 24th, 1957, in a speech, King related a message from Nkrumah and his finance minister to the collective experiences of Black people globally. And I quote, our sympathies are with America and its allies, but we will make it clear through the United Nations and other diplomatic channels that beautiful words and extensive handouts cannot be substitutes for the simple responsibility of treating our colored brothers in America as first-class human beings, end quote. So if we are to be first-class nation, we cannot have second-class citizens, also end quote. Dr. King and Dr. Nkrumah shared a longstanding commitment to valuing education in a society and articulated its vast benefits given to an oppressed people. Both of them sought education as a form of liberation. As a colleague, Ms. Lorraine Bottomy reminded me recently in an article she wrote literally just this week, where she states, and I quote, "In 1947, King wrote for the Morehouse College campus newspaper. He expressed his philosophy on the purpose of education. King believed that education should serve as a very specific purpose. The function of education, therefore, is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. But education, which stops with efficiency, may prove the greatest menace to society. The most dangerous criminal may be the man gifted with reason, but with no morals." Dr. King reminds us that having intellect and being able to critically think are incredibly important only when coupled with strong character. Connected to Dr. King's perspective is Dr. Nkrumah's national call for action on education. We learned from our colleagues at the University of Cape Coast, Dr. Peter Boitier and Dr. Kwame Osei-Katin, in a 2018 article. For Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, education is seen as, and I quote, "the keystone of people's life and happiness." Thus, Dr. Nkrumah wanted the university colleges in the Gold Coast to train intellectuals capable of combining both theory and practice, as well as use their energies to assist in the task of national reconstruction, end quote. Dr. Nkrumah knew that nation building relied heavily on the educational liberation of Ghanaians. Inextricably articulated by King and Nkrumah are the calls to action of being critical thinkers with strong character, who with the application of theory to practice can literally build nations. Next, exploring the inequality in US higher education. Since I'm a professor of higher education that's centered in the US, I figured I'd use the US context for which to offer my example. Yet I'm sure we can find connections from this story across cultural contexts. I'll present the US higher education story through a story I'm titling The Tale of Two. I want to paint a picture of just one institution amongst approximately 4,000 institutions in the US. I should note that there is some transferability from this story to other higher education institutions in the nation, while noting there are limitations to its generalizability to all. What I will, however, share regarding these two students will have implications on decisions made by institutions in the US and directly impact the lives of persons affiliated with our institutions. Haverford College is located in Haverford, Pennsylvania. The land the institution occupies is on the original tribal ancestral land of the Lewani Lenape indigenous people. Haverford College is a private liberal arts institution that was founded in 1833 by imperialists, but more specifically Quakers. The institution has a history of preaching equality and social justice regarding their compositional diversity. While communities of color have existed on the campus since the 1900s, there's little to no mention of indigenous people being a part of the broader community. So for instance, the college total enrollment is 1,353 students. The student body is represented by 42% students of color and 14% international students. I should note that I'm not sure of the cross-section between those communities. Moreover, 98% of the students live on campus, while 48% of the faculty also live on campus. And about 34% of the students play intercollegiate sports. Just to give you an idea, the tuition at Haverford is approximately $73,000 annually, exempting families earning less than $60,000 from taking out loans. This brings us to the recent status of Haverford College during the COVID-19 pandemic in early March of 2020. Recently, an article was published in the New York Times by Nicholas Casey titled, "College Made Them Feel Equal. The virus exposed how unequal their lives are." The article introduces two young, bright students who attended Haverford College. To our left is Miss Isabel Canning. She is photographed in front of her family's vacation home in Maine, which is located in the northernmost region of the US. The article notes, and I quote, Miss Canning had Latin roots. Her mother immigrated from Portugal in the 1970s, then married to an established Maine family that ran a distribution business. Each summer, the family headed to the seaside town of Boothbay, Maine, where Isabel's father had taught her to play lacrosse. She is a member of Haverford's lacrosse team. At the onset of campus closings due to COVID-19 in March 2020, Isabel's family quickly brought her to the summer home in Maine. To our right is Miss Tatiana Lation. She is photographed in front of her family's food truck in Florida, which is located at the southernmost region of the United States. So geographically, the students couldn't be farther from each other. And metaphorically, the article goes on to share how their worlds were even more divided. As noted in the article, Tatiana's mother grew up in Puerto Rico before moving to Florida. Upon the urging of her high school guidance counselor, and really much to her surprise, receiving a full scholarship offer from Haverford, Tatiana decided to attend the institution. She joined the college's lacrosse team and lived on the same floor as other teammates on the campus apartment building. When news of the campus closing reached her, following the cancellation of their lacrosse game, Tatiana left Pennsylvania and traveled to Jacksonville, Florida, where she found her parents' food truck business floundering, and she began to seek part-time employment at a local grocery store. Both students were participating actually in a political science class called Forced Migration and Refugees, where both of them were serving as teaching assistants. Prior to COVID-19, you see, both students lived on the same campus. They played on the same lacrosse team. They traveled to games together. They engaged across campus activities, had access to the same campus resources, gathered in the same classroom spaces, and were taught by the very same professor. As noted by the article's author, for decades, small liberal arts schools like Haverford prided themselves on being, quote, the great equalizer. The pandemic has unearthed the issues regarding access to resource inherent in how family and friend networks assist in providing for others. For instance, at the onset of the national attention given to the pandemic, Isabel's uncle provided her with masks and gloves, you see, because he was a distributor. She was especially in need of these supplies due to pre-existing health conditions. Tatiana, on the other hand, at the onset of the news, came home to engage with her family in figuring out how to make ends meet, as their family finances were frayed due to the impacts of COVID-19. Once the campus decided to shift its operations during March of 2020 of the pandemic, Haverford's response to COVID-19 included, very similar to other US campuses, extending their spring break, transitioning to video conferencing for classroom engagement, adjusted course syllabi to incorporate modified course assignments, facilitating immediate residence hall closings, ending all campus extracurricular and intercollegiate sports, and canceling study abroad programs. So now Isabel and Tatiana find themselves in separate physical locations with differing time demands, contrasting familial expectations, varying levels of financial stability, and differential home learning environments. Verily, their station in life impacted their access to networks as they are trying to obtain success in college. As noted by their professor in the article, it's as though you had a front row view on American inequality and the ways in which it was disguised and papered over. You see, from the founding of Haverford College to its current day representation, settler colonial ideologies have informed the education attainment, access network, class status, racial and ethnic identity hierarchy, gender identity hierarchy, and organizational decision-making that divides and plagues our US society. The implications of settler colonialism are detailed in the 1619 Project, which is curated by the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones. Her work highlights the social historical narratives of oppression for which we are informed by that settler colonial society that we operate under today in the US. The connections between the narratives of the past and present leads us to the widening divide between Isabel and Tatiana, regardless of their physical location and enrollment status at Haverford. In another quote from that same professor, she persists, "It's possible to believe that we can bridge inequalities by coming together at Haverford campus, or that we can at least soften the edges. And then there's the incredible rupture. I'm very worried about what comes next for them." My response to her are the words of my colleague, Dr. Jillian A. Martin. The mechanism that Haverford values of equality and inclusion is now been removed. While I'm sure her comments were well-intentioned, the professor's statements leave me with the impression that US higher education systems promote the notion that truly one can be successful in our education system, but only if you fully participate in using our settler colonial informed standards of labor and capitalize within our valued economic system. You see, this system places the onus on the individual solely at their social location in society, at the intersections of one's race, gender, ability, socioeconomic class, and sexuality, rather than disrupting the systemic ills that inform the structures of our campus organizations. Access to education is the great equalizer and pathway to realizing liberatory practices in the US and Ghana. And thus, education as a liberatory practice should become the focus of the responses and approaches to COVID-19 in the US and Ghanaian higher education. Again, while the narrative I've shared regarding Haverford does not serve as a single narrative for US higher education, the narrative does have transference to the implications of how higher education globally has responded and approached managing COVID-19. I offer these questions for consideration. How do we promote the economics of higher education under the guise of protecting people? What if higher education moved from a model of economics where it's focused on itself and resources to a transformative space? And what if US and Ghanaian higher education helped to lead the country and even the world in innovations towards decolonization? This current system is not serving us. We know that now. And we know that it is our commitment to upholding colonization that actually got us here. My colleague, Dr. Martin, and I offer a fundamental transformative approach to addressing the implications of COVID-19 as visually represented through our global higher education transformative response model to COVID-19. As outlined in this conceptual model, reading from left to right, the institutional mission serves to guide the university and/or college. Whether electing an approach to institutional change that uses socially just and equitable practices or employs decolonizing and education as a liberatory practice, you see, we believe that those two are delineated because while those practices are similar, they're not wholly the same. These approaches can serve at the center of the institution's mission and decision-making regarding the 5 areas that are listed in the middle of the model. It is important to note that the 5 areas are not listed in a hierarchical or prioritized order. Essentially, either employing decolonizing practices, education as a liberatory practice, and/or a combination of socially just and equitable practices to inform the institution's work with stakeholders, provision of services, management of financial and political implications, engagement in student development, and co-constructing student learning overall lead to a more sustainable and human-centered response to COVID-19, whether the institution is exploring strategies in reaction to, engage in the management of, or practicing from restoring due to COVID-19. As my mother will remind me, for whom are you centering in this work? I offer that we are focusing on humanity. The model centers decolonizing practices, education as a liberatory practice, and socially just and equitable practices in our responses, plans, actions, evaluations, so that higher education can provide the mechanism for equity over equality. More broadly, if institutions globally use economic and capital-driven methods to address their operations, contributions to learning and supporting students, they'll continue to widen the divide between persons like Isabel and Tatiana. Situated at any global context, at the reactive, management, and restoring elements of their planning in response to COVID-19. We persist that through the application of our model, Tatiana's mental load is equilibralized. Now, I literally made that word up. But ultimately, there's more of a balance to Isabel's circumstances, and she can participate with what she needs to meet the outcome measures of college success throughout the global pandemic. Ultimately, our goal is that Tatiana and Isabel have what they need for themselves, whether in a physical campus or a virtual one, to be safe, secure, stable, and able to learn in an educational environment that promotes liberation of thought, practice, and intellect. Now, the model I explained offers a 30,000-foot view. So here are some practical examples of restorative opportunities in US and Ghanaian higher education collaborations that promote a liberatory practice. A critical element of realizing liberation through education in Ghana and the US is highlighted for me in the significance of maintaining sustainable partnerships and elevating the voices of international partners and graduate students. You see, one pole cannot build a house is the Ghanaian proverb that informs my commitment to sustainable partnerships with my global partners. Our collaborations have allowed us to include African higher education professional associations like the Association of African Universities. Partnering with them has been invaluable in our work. My collaborators and I continue to elevate the voices of our colleagues and students, well, at least pre-COVID, and in-person annual colloquias that allow for us to focus on pressing issues in Ghanaian higher education and engage the participants who are a part of our study abroad program with other colleagues in higher ed in Ghana. Also through our annual virtual international symposium, which is the culminating event of the study abroad program that we host as well. Allowing participants and global partners to share their knowledge gained through their experiences in Ghana with others. And the incredibly successful Student Innovation Research Expo, which is hosted annually by IEPA in the Cape Coast, Ghana area, allowing emerging scholars from across the country to share their scholarship. Currently, my Fulbright research centers restorative collaborations. This project includes a participatory action research design to explore how Ghanaian faculty and practitioners are employing culturally conscious pedagogy and practices that decenter ideologies of the global North in their contributions to the welfare of students in higher education and how those norms may have shifted during the COVID-19 pandemic. As a team, we really want to learn about the application of African Indigenous practices in Ghanaian higher education and how those practices may inform policy development or theory or philosophy development, pedagogical explorations, and curriculum development, using the Ghanaian context as the center of our knowledge acquisition. I have been blessed to partner with an amazing team of fellow researchers, inclusive of elders and historians, graduate students who are part of the Institute for Educational Planning and Administration at the University of Cape Coast, student services and faculty from the Ghana Institute of Management and Public Administration, also referred to as GIMPA, my esteemed colleagues who are also with IEPA, and graduate students from the University of Maryland. Through our collective work, we have partnered at every aspect of the project and are looking forward to completing our data collection and learning from that data from this semester. You know, I'm learning that my work here in Ghana involves really a spiritual immersion and connection to engaging and learning from healing epistemologies. Like the work of Dr. Faluta Moya, that allows me to explore the complex implications of coloniality in global education while centering African Indigenous knowledges. As noted earlier, my work uses participatory action research to include the voices of local community elders, faculty, graduate students, and higher ed professionals here in Ghana, as we collectively expand on the work of Dr. George Sefaday's contributions to learning what cultural and traditional knowledge and truths and epistemologies have been applied during COVID-19 to support the student development and success of college students during their college going process. Finally, during my Fulbright appointment, we will go further to strengthen local community partnerships between IEPA and a particularly local secondary school for the purpose of advancing mentorship, college access, and an entrepreneurship program. In the words of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, forward ever, backward never. Our research, scholarship, and teaching will be nothing without the communities we exist in. Our productivity in global learning, teaching, and scholarship must serve to aid and advance our communities. Now, the theory behind decolonizing educational research and teaching allows us to recognize that there is harm and trauma caused by claiming land and claiming a people, while also trying to erase culture from humans who are already free. Imagining new, innovative ways of employing local knowledges is only as good as the ability to be productive, radically healing, and sustainable. In closing, Dr. King reminds us, and I quote, "I have the audacity to believe that people everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for the minds, and dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits." Of course, our communities continue to reclaim their land and all associated measures, inclusive of people, ideology, culture, and traditions, with or without higher education. Yet think of how effective we can be if we collaborated with our communities to implement sustainable, healing, transformative, decolonizing changes. Now that's liberation through education to me. We invite you to continue the conversation. As always, I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Boche-Yadam and Dr. Martin for their continued commitment to sustainable partnerships in Ghana. I'd like to express my appreciation for my research team colleagues, and thank you again to the colleagues at the U.S. Embassy in Ghana for your gracious invitation to join you for your Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. commemorative program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Moore, for your submissions. It's been an insightful one, and we are indeed grateful. A question for you. We want to find out, is there a way of infusing traditional or informal forms of education with a formalized system to make education, higher education, equitable for all?
You know, there actually is, Andrew. And there are some authors, Panoma and Selinsky, who released some work in 2019 that talks about this idea of cultural hybridity, that there is value in indigeneity, but there is also an understanding that much of what we have been taught and have been exposed to has been influenced by coloniality, and that there are some elements that we will bridge together.
Thank you. Hi, Prof. We seem to have lost you there. So if you can make your submissions again so people can hear you.
Absolutely, thank you. I was saying that there is the work of Panoma and Selinsky came out in 2019 that talks about the value of critical hybridity or cultural hybridity, a recognition that there is a bringing together of both indigeneity and also coloniality. Because as colonialism has influenced vast majority of the world, it has implications on how we teach and what we choose to focus on in the learning environment, et cetera. But there is also great value in indigeneity. And in this context, I'm speaking around African indigeneity, and that they are arguing that there is an opportunity to bridge through what they refer to as critical hybridity or cultural hybridity.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Another question is, what are some of the inequalities in the Ghanaian educational system, higher educational system, your research has identified, and how do you propose we can overcome those challenges?
Yes, I think that the inequalities that we see kind of across the world are showing themselves certainly in higher education. And those have implications on gender inequality, regional representation in our institutions here in Ghana. Do we have students that are choosing to advance themselves through higher education that are coming from all parts of the country? I think there is also room for us to expand what support and advancement looks like for students with disabilities, whether that's physical, learning, emotional, and psychological. And, I'll finally say that there is room for us to think about how do we support students across a variety of identity areas that we may not have had an opportunity to explore previously, but that can be very valuable and helping not only the individual to better understand themselves, but also build community across those identity areas. So there are some inequalities around some of those areas. And I would also say around social economic level. And unfortunately, not only regarding money, but also capital, like who has access, if you will, to education in your schools, in your churches, your mosques. Are people encouraging you to seek out higher education? In addition, do you have the finances for which to do it? And so these are problems, I think, that plague higher education worldwide and present an opportunity for us here in Ghana to really think about creative and sustainable ways to address them.
Thank you so much for that. Another question, what will be the highlight of your research work in Ghana so far?
To be honest with you, the highlight is being able to work with Nana Osei Bonsu Kantanka. Like, I am over the moon excited to work with him. And I had the pleasure of meeting him a few years ago. And for those who know, he is an incredibly gracious and honestly, a truly intelligent man. And through his graciousness, has been willing to engage with us in all of our meetings, and seeing, honestly, the engagement across graduate students and faculty, and also him really warms my heart to know that there's not only a commitment to the research, sure, but there's really a commitment to, going back to what I said earlier, being in spaces that are healing and restorative. We laugh in our research team meetings. We talk about things that are current events for Ghana and the US. And we also talk about strategies, as there might be some people who are working in professional units where they're having some challenges, or they may want advice on how to address things. So the research team goes beyond just about thinking about the data itself and the work that we're doing, but also as a community. And that's really, to me, very powerful and something I really enjoy.
Thank you so much for that. And since we are hosting this program in commemoration of Martin Luther King's Day, I'll ask, there are a couple of questions centered around Martin Luther King. Someone wants to know, what makes Martin Luther King Jr. unique from other leaders of the civil rights movement?
I think that's a really very helpful question. There obviously was a shared and a collective call for members of the civil rights movement around ensuring not only freedom, but respect and access for a community of people who were written into law to be excluded from life and liberty. And so while there's that shared goal that they have, what I think distinguishes Dr. King a little differently is he was used really as the vehicle by the movement to elevate this conversation of nonviolence. You see, there were members of the civil rights movement who were already engaged in nonviolent approaches and strategies. And that wasn't just happening in the US, that was happening around the world, in South Africa, in Ghana, and other places. People were using India nonviolent approaches. And I think what made him a little bit unique to the movement is that the movement then elevated him in a way as a leader around nonviolence. And that, I think, is what people tend to gravitate more and remember about his work. I think it's important, and even his daughter, Dr. Bernice King, would remind us that nonviolence is not synonymous with inaction, nor is it synonymous with believing that the status quo is okay. Nonviolence is just a strategy to address exactly what he has always named in his work throughout his time here on Earth, is that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere, and that we must fight the oppressive nature and then also the oppressive laws and oppressive structures that prevent people from gaining access to a better quality of life, whether that is Black people, people of color, people with little means. His whole persona and purpose was around addressing injustice, and not just addressing it, but literally attacking it.
Thank you so much for that. Our time is also far gone, and we would like to take final comments from you before we wrap up.
Thank you. Well, again, I am just so honored to be a part of this, having met Andrew and Archibald and Rita with the American Spaces. They're doing such exceptional work. And I hope that those who have not had the opportunity to engage with the programs and services and educational outreach that they offer will seek out those opportunities as they provide you with a vehicle and pathway to other opportunities and educational attainment that you may have. And so that I want to make sure I name for the people who are joining us today to please do reach out. And then finally, I'll say, as I continue my work here and I continue to develop and grow as a person, it's important to always reflect and recognize that while you have some answers, you don't have all of the answers. And so I am prayerful and hopeful that as I continue with my scholarship here, but then also maintaining and building relationships here, I can also be reflective and continue to learn and be willing to accept new knowledge as I grow as a person and also grow as a scholar and someone who is committed to really engaging in restorative practices globally.
Thank you so much, Professor Moore, for your submissions and for making time for us today. And to our viewers, we say thank you for staying with us as well. Before wrapping up today's event, I also like to take the opportunity to introduce you to a resource you might find useful that is for our Ghanaian audiences. It's eLibrary USA. It's a state-of-the-art digital library with 9 premier databases ranging from magazines, dissertations, videos, and so many more materials you can use for your research purposes. Usually, this resource is only available for use in our American spaces, but with the global pandemic closing down our space, we are making access to the resource virtually to everyone. If you are interested, kindly sign up using the link in the chat box. It should take you about 2 minutes or less to complete, and you receive your login details within 48 hours upon request. Please note, this is not a link to the database, but a form with which you request access. And on that note, we'll say thank you so much for joining us and making time for us. Remember to wash your hands under running water with soap for at least 20 seconds, wear masks in public, and practice social distance. So we come your way next time.